Hey everybody, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have a Siani, Eye of the Storm, and Eligeth Crossroads Augur partner mono blue draw deck. Wow, that's a mouthful. This deck is submitted to us from Anonymous, whose only note on improvement says needs a general boost in power and speed. Let's see what that looks like in a mono blue deck, and let's see what we can do to improve it. As always, this deck list is in the video description below, and I highly recommend, if you are watching or listening to this video, to open it up and take a look yourself. It's really helpful to get better at deck building to look at a lot of decks and see what you think first before you hear someone else talk about it. And if you think of anything I don't think about, put it in the comments below. Together we can all make this deck into the best version it is. So quickly, who are these commanders and why are we using them in this deck? Well, Siani is a 4-mana Jin Monk, 3/2 flyer, whose main ability is that when Siani attacks, you count the number of attacking flying creatures and you scry that much. Nice and simple. And Eligeth, who I would assume is the main idea here, like the stronger of the two, and the idea of the deck. Eligeth says it's a 6-mana 5/6 Sphinx with flying. And they say, if you would scry, instead draw that many cards. So that's kind of the core of an Eligeth deck, is that your scries become draws. As someone who's familiar with Magic knows, scrying is a lot easier than drawing. And that transition allows us to gain a huge amount of card advantage and a huge amount of mana advantage usually, and ride that to victory. Now, this deck is called Sphinx, but I don't think it's a Sphinx deck anymore. And it has some elements that work with Siani, with flying creatures, and it has some scry elements, but all of these have been kind of combined. And so this is why I would call this deck a card draw deck. And we're going to use that idea as we build it. We're going to kind of build around that. So we're looking for speed, we're looking for power. What can we change in the deck? Well, the first thing I want to do is come down here, is I want to look at our mana curve. And we can see our mana curve is a little all over the place. We have quite a few in 1 and 2, we dip in 3, and then we go up to 4, and then we go down a little smoother down, which is fine, but we should note that 4 mana is really high. Blue is a color that by itself has a hard time ramping, has a hard time creating treasure tokens, it has a hard time just getting ahead in mana. It is known as the control color, it is known as the slowest color. So we need to be really, really vigilant when we create a mono blue deck, because we have to be really careful with the curve, because it is the hardest thing to do. The mana curve here says the average mana value is 3, which is really high. I don't know if that's counting lands or if we're low on lands. We're at 33 lands, so we might be a bit low on lands. So let's see what we can do with that in mind. So one of the first things I'm going to suggest is we're going to try to cut out cards from the 4 mana slot as much as we can, and we're going to try to see which cards come out and what strategies we can improve. Right now it feels that the card draw strategy is the strongest, and I'd like to put some power behind that. The other thing to consider is probably ramp. But let's start by seeing what we can take out that's on the higher end of the curve. Going through creatures, the first one is really, really easy. Scourge Fleet sticks out here as a giant bounce creature that is neither a Sphinx nor has flying. This is just, I believe, a very, very high costed creature in its ability to bounce the rest of the board. Now, the problem is that bouncing the board isn't the same as board clearing. If your friends have a lot of tokens, this can be a really, really good card. But otherwise, this is 7 mana for a 6/6 that gives your opponents a turn to reestablish, their board. It's really hard, though you do have things like Leyline. Where are we? Leyline of Anticipation, and we have Vidalcan Orrery here. It's still kind of hard for this deck to flash in this creature, so it doesn't seem to really fit into the strategy. It's kind of here as a card that just has a really good ETB, and cards with really good ETBs, I don't like them when they're 7 mana. Likewise, we have some Sphinxes up here. Artemis All-Seeking, who can repeatedly draw for you and has, now let's see. When it deals damage to opponent, you may reveal your hand. If cards with at least 6 different converted mana costs are revealed this way, that player loses the game. Now, I think this is really cool, but if this was the goal of the deck, I'd rather it be the commander. This is kind of a very difficult win condition to manage when we are not 100% committing to this strategy, because if she's in the command zone, which you could do, this is a mono blue deck. When she's in the command zone, we do gain the ability to have access to her at all times, and then we're already playing Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves. We can set up the win that way. In this situation, we need to draw cards one by one to find Artemis, cast her, hopefully give her haste, otherwise don't, and then hope that we're in a position that we can reveal the 6 different converted mana costs and immediately defeat them. And that's one opponent. With all that said, I don't think in this current iteration of the deck Artemis belongs here. Unless you want to make her the commander, I wouldn't play her. I mentioned we had a few Blink decks recently, and I mentioned that drawing cards, even a high number of cards, is not a good way of getting a singular card from your deck into your hand. It's a very, very bad way to dig. With my example having been in a Blink game, I had to draw, I believe it was around 26 to 28 cards in one turn to be able to do the thing I wanted, which is just an unreasonable amount of cards. With Artemis here, the chances of drawing her and being able to use her are not that great, and she's 6 mana, so she's kind of gumming up, your board. She does have a nice activated ability, but once again, she has summoning sickness, so I don't particularly like her here. Psychosis Crawler is fantastic here. I think Psychosis Crawler is a really, really good card. It is a big beater, but has a very good static ability, so I'm very happy here. So we have Prognostic Sphinx. This is a card I've seen a few times. I think it's interesting. It is a difficult to deal with creature, and the upside is that you scry 3 a turn. Now that's not nothing. I think there's like this adage that if you scry, like a scry is worth half a card. I don't think that's really true. I tend to think of a scry as worth like a third of a card, but scrying 3 is a really good number. The advantage that you get from it is pretty high. However, having to play this card and having to then keep it around, and yeah, you can give it hexproof, but it doesn't do anything until it attacks. And if for some reason someone really wanted to stop you before combat, they could target it with something because to give it hexproof, you have to tap down your creature. I don't know. I feel like it's not impactful enough. I think the idea here of playing Prognostic Spirit on turn 5, then playing Eligeth on turn 6 is is a little it's a little cool, but it's not very, very strong. At that point, Eligeth is the one that's going to be targeted because honestly, even looking at the cards that you play, like if you were against someone like this with Pognify, you would leave Prognostic Sphinx and you would just destroy the command. With that in mind, I'm willing to say that Prognostic Sphinx isn't a particularly strong card, even in this setup, and I'm not sure if I particularly want to run it here. If it was lower mana, even with the Scry 3, I don't know, maybe I'd be more keen on it. Defiler of Dreams is great here. It is ramp. It has card draw. You're playing a large amount of permanents, upwards of blue permanents, maybe about quarter of your deck. Could be more, but at the moment, I think it's very, very good. So I'm a big fan of this. Sphinx of Foresight seems another card that is a part of the Sphinx, I guess, build of the deck. You get a scry and upkeep, and if it's in your hand, you get to scry 3. Sorry, if it's in your hand at the start of the game, you get to scry 3. I don't think this is particularly good. I do appreciate that it's 4 mana, but 4 mana is like your highest slot and one of your commander slots, so I'm even more keen on removing it. And so I'm going to suggest that you don't play this, because it is very, very slow. Upkeep effects have a really, really high bar in Commander because there are 3 turns before you get your upkeep. More if you consider the end of your turn. Like if I play this on my main phase, 1 or 2, it has to survive the end of my turn, 3 additional turns, go to my upkeep, and then it'll let me scry 1. That feels like a lot of work for the amount of cards you could probably find that will just scry 1 a turn or surveil 1 a turn. So I'm not particularly keen on this. I agree that it does fill out once again the flying cause for Siani and Scry for Eligeth, but Siani is also 4 mana, so you generally don't want your flyers to be at 4 mana. So I'm not going to be particularly a fan of this card. I'm recognizing probably a lot of this deck assist video is going to suggest some cuts because at this point of the deck, when you're just looking to boost speed and power, just generally, we're just going to try to cut cards that aren't as strong and leave you with the stronger cards and a few more straightforward finishers. So let's keep going. Oneriophage is great. I'm usually not a big fan of this card, but at this power level, it's very appropriate. And the ability of having Ornithage and Eligeth out and scrying to draw a bunch of cards, I really like it. It is 4 mana, but it is one of your finishers. It's like Imperial Plate, so I really do like how much it grows incredibly quickly. I'm a big fan, so absolutely keep that. Cryptic Annelid is a part of these scry finishers or combos. This is really, really good with your command with Eligeth. So I'm not going to say no because this is the fun of the deck. If you're building a scry deck, you're playing Cryptic Annelid. That's like the whole point. I get that. So I'm not going to say to take this out, but you have to always remember that this is a combo piece, and it is what is it? Draw 6 for 4 mana, which is pretty good. I don't think that's bad at all. But you have to remember and treat it that way. You can't treat it like a creature. It just doesn't work that way. Alandra is fantastic. I have nothing to say here. Just a great card. Warden of Evo's Isle is fantastic. It is, once again, you have very little ramp, so I'm really happy to see it here. Thassa of the Sea is fine. This is the level of Scry 1 that I'm okay with, where we have, whereas Sphinx of the Foresight I don't like. Thassa of the Sea not only is indestructible, not only is not a creature half the time, so you don't even have to worry about things that target creatures like Swords to Plowshares. The fact that it's the upkeep scry is great, but I'm really, really liking the target creature you control can't be blocked. A lot of your finishers are things like Psychosis Crawler, things like where is the Ornithage or putting Imperial Plate on something. With all that in mind, I am really, really a big fan of making them unblockable. Flyers are a little more common than you'd think, so flying is not necessarily always the best evasion, and the ability to just straight up say, nope, this creature is unblockable is really, really good here. Lab Maniac is another type of finisher, big fan. Kira, Great Glass Spinner, is good. I have no problem with this card here. I think it's a generically good blue blue spell that works in decks that play to the board. Which, with that in mind, I would like you to play more to the board with this. This is going to be a general thing, and my suggestions are going to go in this direction. But I think your creatures and your enchantments, where are you, that are blue, namely for Defiler of Dreams, I would like you to have more cards on board so you can represent more of a threat and be more proactive against your opponents. Triskaidekaphile, also good. SER, great. Augur Hours, great. Fairy Seer. Delver of Secrets is a little weak here. I don't know if I would play this card here. I'm not entirely sure what I would suggest at this point, but a 3/2 flyer is not really where you want to be in Commander. You need like 10 turns of attacking, and that's only 30 damage out of 40. And even then, considering the numbers here, with the scry, you can flip it probably pretty regularly, but even then, I don't know if that's really where you want to be. All right, I went through all of the creatures because I thought they were really strong, like really important. The rest I'm going to be a bit quicker on. Psychic Impetus feels a bit weird in this deck, but that's fine. I think I recognize it's there for the regular scry. And scry is something that like the more you scry, the better your scries get. But I one of the things that's tricky about scries is that there's this tension in scrying where at a certain point you need to you need to shuffle your deck. Sorry, let me complete this thought. Let's say early in the game you see, let's say Teferi's Ageless Insight. You're kind of low on mana, and the top deck of your top card of your deck that you scry is Teferi's Ageless Insight. This is one of the most powerful cards in your deck and also generally in blue. You definitely want to cast this spell. But however, you're stuck on a number of lands that prevent you from actually casting this. And therefore, in order to draw Teferi's Ageless Insight, you're going to have to you're going to have to take another turn off of not playing a land. This could put you too far behind in the game, so instead you decide to put Teferi's Ageless Insight onto the bottom of your deck. Now, if you don't have a reasonable amount of shuffle in your deck, which there's Myriad Landscape, and I think that's it out of lands, and I'd have to look through everything else probably a little later, but if that is your main way of shuffling, this card is just gone, right? Unless your opponent like Path of Exiles a creature and you get a land, this card you will just never draw because it's literally on the bottom of your deck. Now, granted, every scry you do to the bottom of your deck actually brings this higher up in the deck, but that's a ridiculous way to view it. You have to scry half your deck and then draw the other half of your deck almost in order to get back to this card. So, with that in mind, you have to be careful with all of this scrying. Um, that's just a general thing I just wanted to say. I just thought of looking at Psychic Impetus. Otherwise, Psychic Impetus is great. I think it's fine here. It's just a generally good card, and since it's low mana, I don't mind it. Here we have Flow of Knowledge. It's instant. That's fine. Illusionist Gambit is really, really specific. Like it basically cancels an attack, right? You basically, when it's declare blockers, you remove all attacking creatures from combat, untap them, and they have another attack phase, except for this time they can't attack you. So I think this is weird. I think this belongs in a very specific deck, and this deck's not it. Like, it's a 4 mana fog for you, kind of, right? One of the big problems with this is if you imagine yourself at low life and an opponent is attacking you with like just enough to defeat you. Let's say you're at like 10 and they attack with 2/5/5s and they attack their opponents with your other opponents with other creatures. You cast this, it's really not done much. Those 5/5s now, yes, go to different targets, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't really put you that far ahead. It doesn't really change the board. All it does is kind of annoy your opponents, so you've spent 4 blue mana on kind of nothing. The dream, the dream is someone attacks you with a million creatures, and you just, instead divert that damage to the rest of your opponents. It's kind of like Ink Shield in a way, but Ink Shield gives you gives you tokens in the end, and Illusionist Gambit just kind of, I mean, the ceiling is that you take out your other opponents with it, but when it gets back to your turn, you still have to deal with that board. So it's 4 mana. 4 mana is a lot. I wouldn't play this. Behold the Multiverse is fine. Resculpt is fine. I think everything else is generally good. Sorcery, same idea. Spectral Deluge feels like a lot, but I guess if you foretell it, it's not as bad. It becomes a 3 mana board wipe at sorcery speed. I think this is just okay. I'll leave it here. Ugin's Insight, Echo Storm. So Tamiyo's Epiphany and Ugin's Insight and Foresee. I'm going to take a moment to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about cards that we're going to add. So these cards, I just want to take a moment to talk about. You have to think of these cards as cards that work when Eligeth is out, right? Tamiyo's Epiphany for Scry 4 and Draw 2 is a lot of mana. 4 mana is a lot of mana for this ability. And though it works really good in general theme of scrying, and as I was saying before, scrying gets better the more you scry because you get to see more of your deck, it's still a lot of mana to not impact your board and not really get your, not to get ahead of the game, right? Think about this. This is a strange thing to think about. So you got Elegant out. Tamio's Epiphany is 4 mana, draw 6 cards, just like Cryptic Annelid. Like notice the difference, right? This at least gives you a 1/4. It can block, it can attack, it's present. Whereas on the other hand, Tamio's Epiphany is also sorcery speed. It's not even instant speed. Gives you the 6 cards, but does nothing. You need additional mana to keep going. And I think a lot of these are just not good enough. Like 4C also comes to mind, though I absolutely love this art and the pun. I think it's really, really. I think it's the same text, eh? Yeah, it's the same text. I just don't think these cards are good enough. Mainly because they don't, when you were looking for power and speed, this doesn't do either. It is slow and it doesn't play to the board. I think the ceiling, like what you were trying to do with Eligeth, is like Mystic Speculation. This becomes 1 mana draw 3, which is really strong, but much more reasonably, it becomes 3 mana draw 3. I think that's fine. Um, with that in mind, the cards that are lower mana, Preordain, Serum Visions, like these are the cards that you want to use with Eligeth more than you want to use, the 4 mana 4Cs and things like that. So I think you should take those out if you can. All right. How are we on time? We're doing good. So we've talked about a lot of the cards that don't kind of belong here. Let's talk about some cards that we can add to this deck and empower it so it can do what it wants more often. Well, really quickly, I think we should look at any mana rock that we can get. Tap, add or gain. Who knows? Let me say artifact. I know there's a section that we can say for mana rock, but let's see if there's anything we are missing. Say not creature, and then say, actually, you know what would be probably easier? Let's do it like this. Artifact, and then we'll put in the symbol for blue because we really do want these to tap for blue. And then we're gonna say, yeah, commander, format, commander. All right, let's see what we can find. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of options we haven't thought of, but interesting. This didn't get what I wanted to. Okay, well, let's just start with the basics. We've got Sky Diamond. Sky Diamond is a one you're not playing. Nice little bit of ramp. Mind Stone. Mind Stone is another nice bit of ramp. It lets you draw a card. After that, oh, excuse me. After that, I would think of honestly, any 2 mana mana rock that taps for mana can be put in here, but I wouldn't put too many. What I would do is I'd at least go up a few lands first, go up to 35 lands, and then I would worry about mana rocks. Okay, the mana rock section, there's not a lot here. Let me see if there's anything else I could say really quickly, but this is the kind of deck, yeah, that Arcane Signet gets played in, and I think it's strange, but it makes sense. We're just in mono blue. Our options aren't very good. Actually, that brings to mind you could also probably play Felwar Stone for the same reason. Yeah, it's not great, but it taps for mana. You're in mono blue. You need it. You're going to take what you can get. All right, let's talk about the kind of cards we can use to improve the deck. So, general kind of enablers for more card draw. I think immediately of Fairy Mastermind. This is a new card recently that gets printed that has a particularly high ceiling of how much you can draw. It has an activated ability that draws you a card. It has flying. It has flash. I think it's perfect for the deck. It is what, $6, so it's not too bad, but it is a strong card that you can just put in here at very little cost. Misspell it, but Muldrifter is also really good here, and I would heavily recommend it as it allows you to draw 2 cards. It is a creature. It is a 5 mana. Like at worst, it's a divination. At best, it stays on board. It gets the benefit of cards like Defiler of Dreams and Warden of Evos Isles, so you can reduce the cost into making it just 3 mana, and you get to keep the creature. Or you can pay 1 mana to draw 2. I think this is pretty strong. After that, I think this is one I was thinking of, and I'm going to put it in here even though I don't know if I would really recommend it. If you want to keep like a big high mana finisher and you want to keep the flying theme of the deck, Wind Reader Sphinx like is thematically really good for the deck, but is it a really strong card? Not so much. It's just like a flavor win. It is a Sphinx. It cares about creatures that fly, and it cares about drawing cards. So all these things together can represent a really strong swing where you can play Wind Reader Sphinx, attack with, if you attack with like three flying creatures and draw three, I think that's just really strong by itself. 7 mana, draw three, and keep a 3/7 on board is nothing to laugh at. And then if you get to untap with it, you can like exponentially, because you can attack with it, every turn you're drawing more and more cards as long as you keep playing flyers. I think this is really strong. You've got options to ramp into it. Once again, it's a permanent and flying, so it's easier to come down on your side of the field. Is it as strong as a card like Fairy Mastermind? Absolutely not, but it's something I would really consider. It allows you to play this and say, "Hey, I'm going to get a lot of advantage in this turn and move forward." All right, so with that in mind, I want to suggest some more finishers. The thing about your deck is that the main way of getting ahead, or the main synergy it wants to do, is drawing cards. This is generically just a very good thing to do. So you can build a very varied power level deck from this, because everyone likes drawing cards, and there's just a lot of different kind of cards that will draw you cards, from really strong ones to kind of weak ones. With that in mind, you get to kind of theme your finishers in a lot of directions based on this, because it's really easy to synergize with this kind of strategy. So the first one is one of our new creators, Gitax, our flip Jin-Gitaxias, who comes in and says whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. That's not great here. It's not really what you want. You're more really using it for its second ability to flip it, where if you have 7 or more cards in hand, which is something the deck can do very easily, it'll flip to the other side, where it will draw you a bunch of cards and give you no maximum hand size. It will bounce the rest of your opponent's cards, and then finally you have for the turn, not even for the turn, I think just in that moment, you have omniscience for all the cards in your hand. I think this is really good. I think it combines a lot of the cards that not that I dislike, but I find they have like lacking abilities. Like bouncing all the permanents gets a lot better when it's attached to this, right? It does a pretty good impression of several really powerful cards, and for that alone, I think you should play this card. It doesn't synergize as well as the others, but it doesn't matter. The power level is there, and the fact that you can cast Jin Cataxius and just leave it there for a while, waiting for the perfect turn to use its ability, I think is also really strong. A 5/5 Ward 2 is nothing to write home about, but it is a pretty good card nonetheless. One of the cards that is a part of Jin Cataxius, like one of the abilities, is Seagate Restoration. Seagate Restoration has the real nice benefit of being a land on the other side, but it's just a serious card draw, right? Draw a card plus 1 card plus the number of cards in your hand. You basically double your hand size, and then you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. This is a fantastic spell in your deck and can be really strong in certain hands, allowing you to get really far ahead. Let's look at something a lot cheaper as a finisher. I'm going to seize. Now, this isn't perfectly on theme, but it does represent kind of a fun, lower power win condition in a deck like this. Every time you draw a card, you put a counter on it, and for every 8 counters, you get an 8/8. Now, this is really good with like the aforementioned cards, or when you have Eligeth out and all of a sudden you're drawing like 6 to 7 cards a turn really easily. This lets you turn those card draws into creatures. Now, these creatures are really fragile. They're very bounceable, so they don't necessarily work with Jin Cataxius himself, but they can represent a really strong board state at any time. because one of the key things about this, unless I will say, unless you know someone is running the split second, I forget what that card is, the split second destroy enchantment, split second. What is this called? Croissant Grip. Unless you know someone's really playing Croissant's Grip, and at lower power levels, people tend to because it comes with a lot of commander decks. Then that's a problem. But otherwise, what you can do is you never actually need to remove the 8 counters and create a Kraken. You can kind of just hold them there as a threat until it's like the perfect time to unleash your Krakens, I guess. And then you can represent at the end of your last opponent's turn, 3/8/8s come to your turn, they're no longer summoning sick, attack one of your opponents and take them out. I think it's a fun little card. It's not the strongest thing, but it is definitely out there. Now, what I will finally end on in terms of additions, oops, it's not Welder, it's Wielder. Did I misspell Wielder? Is 3 Planeswalkers that I feel like I did misspell Wielder. Uh, 3 Planeswalkers that I would suggest that work on the draw card theme and are just generally good Planeswalkers. So Jace is great here because Jace doubles as another win condition like Lab Maniac. Jace just lets you draw an additional card a turn. It's not the strongest ability, but it combos with your win. It's one of your win conditions, and generally just kind of puts you ahead. I would say this one's the weakest of the three, but he's also the lowest mana of the three. So this is I'll leave to you to decide. It can be it can be really strong when you have the ability to draw through your entire deck really quickly, but also sometimes it's 4 mana to just draw one card and one of your opponents knocks him out of the game. So I'll let you decide the power level on it, but it does fit very much on theme. Something even more on theme is Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. Tefero. I like Tefero. So Teferi Temporal Pilgrim is very much so just built on the basis of card draw. He doesn't have any plus loyalty abilities, but whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty counter on Teferi. And then for -2, you get a creature that also grows, much like your 4 mana squid. You get a 2/2 with vigilance. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Both Teferi and its creatures can grow incredibly fast, and so I think this is a really, really good addition here. It's also something that's really difficult for players to kind of have an idea of how strong it is because you can cast Teferi, -2, and then just pass the turn without drawing any additional cards, right? And your opponents might not see this too much as a threat. And when it comes back to your turn, you can use any of your cards that draw 3 to 4 extra cards. And all of a sudden, both the token and Teferi have grown considerably. And there's a level that they need to start caring about Teferi or trying really hard to take him out. Alternatively, because he's for loyalty, but that's kind of not really the truth because on your second turn he's up to an additional one. You can -2 turns in a row and keep Teferi. So you don't actually. It's kind of deceptive to see the -4 and the -2 there. So Teferi can be a lot of fun. And then the last one I was going to suggest is Mordenkainen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mordenkainen is also just another card draw command planeswalker. Now, the downside is he is 6 mana, and that is a lot. But he's got a really nice draw too, which is really nice. It also puts a card from your hand to the bottom, which you'll be generally fine with. And then you can also create, once again, another token that grows with your hand size. This one is, instead of growing with card draw, it's equal to double your hand size, which can be really, really good. I think both the token and Mordenkainen himself, combos well with a lot of parts of your deck. And I think this would be a really, really good addition. It's very cheap, which is really nice. And since it's a permanent, you could cut down one of its blue pips. You could ramp into it. I think there's a fine card to ramp into if you can play them out early and just start drawing cards. So those are my general suggestions. I think this deck is in a place where it's trying to figure out what it wants to be. It definitely has that feeling of having been multiple decks, and it is it is visible, right? And so what we want to do is work on removing some of the cards that don't fit the theme as well and trying to play towards a more proactive game where a lot of your threats are permanents. They are gaining you advantage turn by turn. The planeswalkers, um, other things like Jin-Gitaxias staying on the board, and with that, we might get more of a vision of where this deck wants to be. The thing with Eligeth is that Eligeth represents a very high ceiling, but has a lot of hoops to jump through. You have to have the 6 mana to play Eligeth, and then you want to immediately, scry a bunch to draw a bunch of cards. That can be tricky, and perhaps this is more of the kind of commander where you want to keep it on the back, you know, eventually get into it, but like not really rushing out to play Eligeth. In the same way, Siani has a pretty interesting ability, but one that really only is attractive with Elegant, right? Not to say Siani is not great, but scrying, 3 to 4 cards when this creature attacks is not really where you want to be. That's a lot of hoops to jump through. It's 4 mana. It has summoning sickness. It's a lot of work. So with that in mind, I think what we should do is make these kind of changes, see where the deck ends up, see if that power level works a little better in your group. And then if we want to go even further, we have a lot of room, right? Card draw synergy and card draw decks in blue, you have a very, very high ceiling. You get Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora. There's a lot of really good cards that are more expensive that we could be putting into this deck to dramatically increase the power level. Alternatively, and this is the last note I think I'll make, there is something to be said of considering another partner, because right now you can add a second color. Now, this would change the deck dramatically, but I just want to put the idea out there. It doesn't even mean you have to commit very, very aggressively to the second color. You can pick one of the green ones because with Lord of the Rings out, there's a lot of green and blue scry effects and elves that I particularly like. A lot of them are repeatable or just particularly good. I think of that. Actually, let's just look it up. There's that one green card, 1 mana, green, scry 3. Elven Farsight, where you scry 3, you can reveal the top card. If it's a creature, draw a card. If you were going further into creatures, this is another really good card that you could be putting into your deck. And it would be an option. Now, once again, that would change the entire deck, so I'm not going to suggest it seriously. I'm just putting it out there for you to think about. The last thing I will say, though I didn't really go over these, you can think of Kami of the Crescent Moon and other Haunted Mine effects. Let's go to mana. There we go. Kami of the Crescent Moon and the like are draw cards that draw for the entire table. Group hug style draw cards. Now, generally, these cards have a particular kind of strategy behind them, but in a either use these cards as a group hug deck to make everyone like you, or you use them because you can use them better. So here, Kami of the Crescent Moon is really, really strong because you are the draw card deck. So you benefit a lot more from drawing that additional card. It's something to consider. I don't know if I would naturally just put it in. It would require a little more work to put something like this, because then you can think of Temple Bell and the like to just push you a little forward in card draw to defeat your opponents if you believe that the synergy of you drawing a card is more worthwhile than each of your opponents drawing a card, which is kind of a hard sell, but something to consider. All right, I hope this deck assist video was helpful to you. I am interested in seeing the next draft of this deck. It is very clearly, there's a lot of room that we can build upon. So I'm really interested to hear how you push it forward. And if you'd like to submit the new draft of the deck or any deck, as always, there is a link in the video description to put to the form. Sorry, my brain stopped. To the form that you can submit and send me your deck. And as always, I would be very appreciative if you did the like, comment, subscribe YouTube thing. The channel is still growing, and any help is appreciated. I really like Eligeth. It's always a commander that I have in my binder that I want to build around. So I'm really interested to see how this deck list changes and improves. All right, good luck.